50 years ago, on Wednesday, April 3rd, 1974, a bouncing baby boy was born at Glace Bay General Hospital in the second largest city on Cape Breton Island in Canada's Nova Scotia province. Me, Shane Lewis Mackenzie Spencer. Father is Clyde Spencer, a welder for 3 decades from 1969 to 1999, most recently with DevCo, the Cape Breton Development Corporation, and Kathy Mackenzie, a restaurant employee, later a registered nurse until mid-1986, when she suffered a career-ending injury and has been unemployed ever since. Contrary to popular belief, I wasn't named after the title of the Jack Schaefer novel, which became a 1953 film that starred Alan Ladd in the title role. The weather at the time I was born was snowing. The biggest story that day was a massive tornado outbreak in Ontario and several U.S. states like Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Mississippi, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. The President of the United States at the time I was born was Richard Nixon. The Prime Minister of Canada at that time was Pierre Trudeau. I'm the second of 4 children. My older sister, Laurel, was born almost 3 years before I was born. My next sibling would not be for another 11 years when Mitchell was born. I have Asperger's syndrome, but my youngest sister, Haley, born a year after Mitchell, has Tourette's syndrome. My distant relatives include Princess Diana, Winston Churchill, George Washington, Franklin D. Roosevelt, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush. Between 1976 and 1978, I was living in Sarnia, Ontario, where my father made a stainless steel belt buckle during that time. I visited Niagara Falls by going up the Skyline Tower and visiting Marineland, both on the Canadian side in 1977. By mid-1978, we were living in Atlantic Canada again, and I lived in that region ever since. I went to 6 different schools between 1980 and 1993. In 1983, I had an unexpectedly long stay at the IWK Children's Hospital in Halifax from May to July of that year, where I did a lot of walking from the IWK to Spring Garden Road and Barrington Street as far as Scotia Square. I also had a few walks in the public gardens. This actually helped me get to know the city of Halifax better. The last 3 school years I spent were at Glace Bay High School, where I was actually part of the Circle of Friends group because I was so shy of making friends, as well as disability awareness. I was bullied at school way too many times. I could have thrown rocks at them, but I didn't. During the last days of high school, I rode in a Cadillac 6-door limousine en route to the prom, and on the final day of school, when my name was called on the PA, I was given a standing ovation. Shortly after graduating from high school, I visited Newfoundland for the very first time, but only on the west coast, as I went as far as Corner Brook, but stayed in Stephenville for most of the trip. I seriously thought about going to Hollywood for superstardom, but instead, I eventually ended up in Newfoundland, living on the West Coast, eventually working at a major supermarket since 2001. I would have been a lot happier if I was in Hollywood for superstardom 3 decades ago. Recently, my close relatives are getting very concerned about my blood pressure. I have a history of heart disease that affected both of my grandfathers. My maternal grandfather, Melvin Mackenzie, died suddenly back in 1968, and my paternal grandfather, Earl Spencer, died 3 years later in 1971. Also, I've been losing weight for the past couple of months. My goal is to be under 200 pounds. As well, my parents, Clyde and Kathy, both have COPD for the past few years, and my stepfather, Ray McIsaac, is trying to win his battle against cancer. The next chapter in my life is going to see a baseball game between the Boston Red Sox and the Toronto Blue Jays at good old Fenway. But the greatest wish of my lifetime is to meet the world's cutest lady, Florence Pugh, in person. Without her, I'll be terribly bored. Here's to maybe another 50 years of my life. Happy birthday to me!